So, begin with, we're here talking about now about we're moving from cult to the occult. So, we looked at the essentials of cults before, and now we're moving to a different category, but sometimes related, which is the occult itself. And again, for some guidelines for this, for studying the occult, and I say this as a warning, and C.S. Lewis said it well. He says there's two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the demons. One is to disbelieve in their existence, and the other is to have an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. And that's why we need to avoid both, because the demonic world is real, the supernatural world is real, and we have to account for that in our worldview, our practice, our ministry. Otherwise, we're not going to do good ministry. Jesus talked about the devil a lot, and so we need to keep that in our minds for our practice. At the same time, I met a number of Christians who have a wrong approach to this because they're fascinated with the world of witchcraft and magic and the demonic, and they think it's really interesting. And probably the best analogy that I can give you is to do this. That's like being fascinated with the mafia and wanting to get involved with it, or a crime syndicate. The fact is that these are bad people. Demons are bad people. You don't want to hang around with bad people. They're usually dangerous. They want to harm you. So it's not something that you can take lightly. It's not something that you can do, again, with a grain of salt, is that these are folks that hate us, and Satan is out like a roaring lion, seeking whom he might devour. Resist him firm in the faith. So the first thing about studying in this area is that remember that it's not to have an excessive and unhealthy interest. And two, remember that we're not going to approach this with speculation. We're going to start with what we know and then move to what we don't know based on what we know, not the reverse. Because it comes down to it, there's one reason really to study this, and that's to set people free from demonic oppression. Other than that, if you're just doing it for self-interest, like I said, you've got other problems because you love the world of darkness, and hopefully we won't get involved in that. So that's a warning, because I have had students over the years who literally thought they're taking I teach an entire semester course at Biola on demonology and the occult. I mean, some were sitting there literally waiting, when do the demons appear, right? And it's like, dude, that's Southern California talk. Okay, so anyways, we talk about that. So again, guidelines here, be careful. All right. But on the other hand, we don't need to be afraid. Okay? And that's another reason why Christians should study this, is because if you don't know what Satan and demons are and what they can do, people make up things and they have excessive and unhealthy fear about the demonic world, when we don't have to be afraid. Greater is he who is in us than he that is in the world. And that's why you got to start with theology. Okay, God is God. God is the maker of heaven and earth. God is the omnipotent being. And then two, you go to anthropology and soteriology. We're in the image of God, and if we know we're saved, then we are ambassadors for Christ. We have the authority of Christ over the demonic world. Now, when you have those things in place, you no longer have to fear the demonic world. That's another reason why we study this, is to take away fear. Because I still know a lot of Christians that they read the wrong book and they don't want to turn off the lights because they're scared of the dark. For things that go bump in the night. Well, we need to be cautious about that too. So next category, 1B here, a couple of definitions before we proceed. Definition of the occult and related terms. First, the word occult is a word that Christians use to describe these magical and forbidden supernatural practices, such as magic, divination, and spiritism. Right? The people who actually practice these don't usually call them the occult, right? Because the word itself just means secret or hidden. That's what occult means, and it's used in more areas than religion. It's used in science, for example. If there's a particle in your theory that's hidden from the normal means of discovery, you say it's an occult particle. It doesn't mean it's a magical particle. So the word in Latin just means hidden or secret. So, but when we talk about this, we're talking about when Christianity takes over a culture, these practices that were forbidden by Scripture have to now be practiced in secret. Okay, so that's why it's called the occult. So, and then the next word, pagan. I know you've heard the term pagan before. I'm going to talk about paganism and neo-paganism. Oddly enough, the word pagan in Latin actually means just rural or rural people. The people who didn't live in the city, the people that lived, out in the country. Now, the reason for this is because when Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, the old polytheistic, magical practicing religions had to go to the outskirts of the empire. They were the rural people who continued to believe in many gods and practice magic. So hence the Christians called them the pagans. Those were the rural people where you could go and practice these things. A couple other definitions, and then we'll move on. Another word, and this is very important, if you ever want to talk to someone who's involved in witchcraft and neo-paganism, is that witchcraft and neo-paganism is not Satanism. Okay? And as soon as you call a witch or a neo-pagan a Satanist, they're just going to write you off, saying you don't know anything about what we believe. Because remember, Satanism is an anti-Christian religion. Usually a Satanist is someone who had at one time had an affiliation with the church and got angry at God, the biblical God, and then said, I'm going to align myself with God's number one enemy, Satan. Okay? That's usually someone that has a Christian background and is anti-Bible, anti-Christian God. For those that come from the traditional polytheistic, non-Christian area, they just say they're just a pagan religion. They're from their own local, like Druids. They have nothing to do, they don't claim anything to do with Christianity. Now, whether or not they're energized by the devil's power, that, of course, there's one source for magical power, at least biblically, and that's going to be the demonic. But they don't know. But again, the pagans and the witches, they don't overtly worship the devil. And if you say that, again, like I said, they're going to write you off and not listen to anything else that you have to say. And I say that because it's interesting. One of the books I use for my course at Biola, and the Zondervan Guide to Cult and Religious Movements, is a book on witchcraft and paganism. And the author, Craig Hawkins, actually has in there a section that is clear that Satanism is not witchcraft or neo-paganism. And Zondervan, the Christian publisher who published the book, they kept getting nice letters from witches and neo-pagans, finally thanking them, saying, finally you guys got it right, that we're not Satanists. I mean, literally, they were getting nice letters from witches and pagans and everything else because Christians were running around calling these people Satanists all the time. Of course, they ignored the fact that their entire worldview was refuted in the book, but at least they were happy that someone got it right. And I'll tell you, the way to cut off evangelizing someone is to misstate what they believe. So that's why we want to be careful about that and to get some good street cred. I've got a number of stories on that, on how that's useful. I'll just give you the 20-second version of one. I was invited to do a presentation one time, and essentially it was a pseudo debate, but we advertised it as a pseudo debate. The bottom line is, it was supposed to be, they didn't advertise it as a pseudo debate between a witch and a Christian, and but it was a public debate, and half the place was filled with witches and neo-pagans. And afterwards, it was revealed that the guy was debating wasn't really a witch. And bottom line was they went nuts. They tried to rush the stage and attack us and everything. And long and short of it, during the Q&A period, I started answering questions, and the person came up and said, you're deceivers. And so all I did was I started asking them. I said, look, are you a witch? And they were dressed in black and had a pentacle on. And I said, yeah. I asked her a few questions, and they said, well, what kind of witch? This, or this. And they're like, oh, well, I'm this. Okay, then this. But by that time, because I knew the distinctions within neo-paganism and witchcraft, they're like, okay, maybe this guy knows something about it. They still didn't like the fact, but it took care of the hostility because I understood what they really did believe. And remember, don't set up straw men. Don't attack false beliefs that they have. Make sure if we're going to do polemic, we attack the real beliefs. So that said, so it's not Satanism. I already talked about what occult is, and I already talked about what New Age is. So the bottom line with us is what's a biblical view of the occult. what is a biblical view. And Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 14 makes it clear. The occult is going to be divided into a number of practices, but Deuteronomy 18, as far as the prohibitions, that's the grocery list of what God prohibits in the area of the occult. And while there's three main areas of the occult, it comes in a number of practices, but here it is. Here's the grocery list. It says, Deuteronomy 18, verse 9, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, the one who uses divination, the one who practices witchcraft, the one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. Whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. Thus you shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Now again, there it is. If you want to memorize one verse on this stuff in Scripture, it's Deuteronomy 18, because that's the grocery list of everything. I've actually used this. I've been witnessing to a witch one time. She grew up as a Baptist and then converted to witchcraft, and then she had a bad experience, and I was talking with her about it. And she says, yeah, but God accepts some kinds of witchcraft. And I said, really? Why don't you read this passage to me? And she read it out loud. And says, anyone who does these things are an abomination. And I looked at her and said, so what part of witchcraft does God approve? She said, I don't want to be a witch anymore. So look, that was the easiest evangelism I ever did in my life. Read the Bible, okay? So, but that's why, memorizing a few key areas of Scripture are going to be helpful for you in dealing with these folks. Now, again, I encourage you to. You can go to my websites here and get some more materials. Our Christian Apologetics office, I have my entire course, the Demonology Occult course, on CD. So you can order that and take the entire course if you want. But that said, so the Scriptures prohibit occultism, but also note, and this is very important, that the Bible connects occultism with demons. Okay? And forget what the rest of the pagans and the witches think and how their worldview is. We need to be cautious that, no, if you're intruding in these areas, you're intruding into a forbidden area that's energized by Satan and the demonic. And we need to be very careful. In fact, the verses I quote there, Deuteronomy 32 and 1 Corinthians 10, 19, and 20, Paul just quotes Deuteronomy 32 and 1 Corinthians 10. But he says that the Gentiles, in effect, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. The idolatry that they talk about in the passage, he says, an idol is nothing in and of itself. What they sacrifice to are demons and not to God. They connect this idolatry, the polytheism, the graven images, and the practices that go with them, with the demons behind them. Or Satan wants to be like God. He wants to be like the Most High. And that kind of pride, like with the other demonics, they want to be worshipped. They want to do that. So there's multiple, quote-unquote, little gods out there. Now that said, let's move to the general categories of the occult. Now as you see there, the bottom line is this, and I mentioned this in my lecture on cults. 1 Samuel 15 says, rebellion is as of the sin of witchcraft. Okay? God equates the practice of the occult with rebellion. Okay? Why? Because if you look generally at people who practice the occult in these three main categories, and there's really three, all the practices can really be put into these three. There's divination, magic, and spiritism. Divination is seeking knowledge to accomplish your will. In other words, I want to get the secret knowledge so I know how to get something done, which is to accomplish my own will. Magic is looking for some power source that you can redirect according to your will. And spiritism is contacting a spirit for you to accomplish either knowledge or power. I either want to get some knowledge or I want the spirit to accomplish something for me. So those are the three branches, but the whole idea is in the pagan systems and the practices, it's just this. It's not submit to God. It's, I want to find the secret so I can affect the world with my will. I can change things. I can redirect things. It's my kingdom come, my will be done. And that's why God says rebellion is of the sin of witchcraft, because you're trying to find the power and knowledge, not for you to submit to God, but for you to make the world submit to you. So it's an ultimate form of rebellion. Now, perspectives on how this works, and we'll go into this a little more when we get to witchcraft and neo-paganism. The point is this, is that not all people who practice in the occult believe in the supernatural. They have different ideas. And the point of discussing this is that when you talk to someone, don't believe, if there's anything you need to know, is that they all don't believe the same thing. There is no Wiccan creed, where you're going to go and find, some dogmatic statement that every witchcraft adherent or pagan must believe. I mean, literally, there's more diversity and pluralism in this movement than just about anything else, and almost everybody makes it up as they go. That's why you have to, while there are going to be some common ideas you'll come across, you want to effectively talk to someone, make sure you first have them tell you what they believe. And you don't impute beliefs to them. You don't tell them what they believe, because we get offended when people tell us supposedly what we believe. So we return the favor and make sure that we ask them. Now, point is, here's about 5 different ways people understand how the magical world works. Some people believe it's innate human ability. Okay, that you've got some leftovers from the fall, and there's some innate psychic ability, and that some people can recover them. So in other words, it's man-centered. It originates with man. Or you've got some kind of impersonal powers out there, and that's the magic worldview that you can tap into, and again, with your magic, redirect it according to your will. Thirdly, idealism and monistic power. This is the pantheistic worldview. But some people believe that everything is divine, but because you're divine, you can tap into your divinity to work your magic. Okay? And then a hierarchy of entities. Okay? In this view, you've got everything from ascended masters, avatars, you name it, angels, that supposedly you can come and they can give you power or accomplish your will. And then the final category, the atheistic materialistic view, there are some witches and pagans that don't even believe in a supernatural world. What they believe they're doing is they're really atheists. They only believe the physical world exists. But what they believe they're doing in finding with their spells and potions and things like that is they're doing cutting-edge physical science. It's avant-garde science. It has nothing to do with the supernatural. And one example they give for that would be the medieval practice of alchemy. See, back then they considered, alchemy was a well-developed, occult science. But as you stripped away the magical worldview, what did the alchemists actually discover? Well, they were the early chemists. What they were discovering is how certain reactions took place in the physical world. So a lot of some modern people who practice the occult, they think what they are the equivalent of medieval alchemists. They're not really doing anything supernatural, but they're discovering things about the physical world that the rest of us don't know, and how they can use that and accomplish it towards their end. So, are we done? Or? About a minute. Okay. So that's as far as the overall worldview. Now, there are a number of things I'm going to talk about in their application later on in witchcraft and neo-paganism. That's the most general view that I can give you on the nature of the occult. So when it comes down to it, one, be careful, because the Bible connects this with the world of the demonic. And once you unleash the demonic, you're going to have problems. In fact, all the counseling I do in this area, there's always someone at some point who was fooled. They thought it was okay to play with a Ouija board. They thought it was okay to go to a medium or a psychic. But then after that, they make all sorts of claims that there's manifestations going on, or I hear voices in my head, or I hear something like that. But there was some triggering event. And the key is that Satan appears as an angel of light. Satan never knocks on the door and says, hey, I'm here to destroy you. Okay? It's always, no, I'm here to give you secret power, let me in. Okay? So you can get whatever you want. But the problem is that it ends up destroying you. So the Bible connects that with the demonic world. And remember, deception is the key.